Captain Lena Ward stood in the cockpit doorway, her voice sharp enough to cut through the pre-flight hum. "I will not fly with this man." Her finger pointed at Ryan Cole, the quiet co-pilot already seated at his station, methodically reviewing the checklist. The cabin fell silent. Ryan didn't flinch. He simply reached for his tablet and began documenting the hydraulic fluid pooling beneath the starboard wing, a leak Captain Ward had walked right past. In 60 seconds, what started as a power play would become a fight for survival at 30,000 feet. This is the story of the day ego met accountability in the place where mistakes don't get second chances. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe safety should never be negotiable, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. You won't believe where this goes. The morning shift at Coastal Airways began like any other Thursday, with the metallic scent of jet fuel mixing with coffee from the crew lounge and the rhythmic beeping of ground equipment echoing across the tarmac. Inside the operations center, flight manifests scrolled across monitors while dispatchers coordinated departures with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this 10,000 times before. Gate 7 was prepping for Flight 447 to Dallas, a routine 3-hour hop that should have been unremarkable in every way. Ryan Cole arrived at the airport 2 hours before departure, which was his habit. He didn't believe in cutting things close, not when other people's lives depended on precision. He parked his 12-year-old Camry in the employee lot, grabbed his flight bag from the trunk, and made his way through the crew entrance with the kind of quiet purposefulness that made him nearly invisible to the rushing crowds around him. At 42, Ryan had the weathered calm of someone who'd seen enough chaos to value stillness. His daughter Maya always said he moved like he was conserving energy for something important, and she wasn't wrong. The crew briefing room was already occupied when he entered. 3 flight attendants were reviewing safety protocols at one table, while a maintenance supervisor argued with someone on his phone about a parts delay. Ryan nodded to the attendants, poured himself a cup of terrible coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long, and settled into a corner seat to review the flight plan. Dallas. Clear skies. Moderate passenger load. A Boeing 737-800 that had logged 82,000 flight hours and was due for its next major inspection in 6 weeks. Everything looked standard. "You're the new first officer?" A voice cut through his concentration. Ryan looked up to see a woman in her mid-50s standing over him, captain's stripes crisp on her shoulders, her posture radiating the kind of authority that demanded immediate acknowledgement. Her name tag read Ward. Ryan Cole. He stood and extended his hand. "Good to meet you, Captain." She glanced at his hand but didn't take it. Instead, she looked him up and down with an expression that suggested she was cataloging deficiencies. "You're replacing Martinez? Temporary assignment while he's on medical leave. Should be about 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Lena Ward repeated the words like they tasted bad. "And what's your background?" 15 years commercial, started in regional, moved to majors about 8 years ago. Flew internationally for a while before coming back stateside. International. The word came out flat, skeptical. With who? Couple of different carriers, most recently Pacific West. Lena's eyes narrowed. Pacific West had gone under 3 years ago in a spectacular bankruptcy that had scattered its pilots across the industry like debris from an explosion. Ryan had been one of hundreds suddenly looking for work, willing to take whatever he could get to keep his rating current and his daughter fed. He'd ended up here at Coastal, a mid-tier regional carrier that paid less and demanded more, but it was honest work, and he was grateful for it. "So you're one of the Pacific West refugees." Lena's tone made it clear this was not a compliment. "Well, let me be very clear about how I run my cockpit, Cole. I've been flying for 28 years. I've logged over 18,000 hours. I was landing jets before you probably finished high school. When we're in the air, what I say goes. Procedure is procedure, but experience matters more than whatever by-the-book approach you learned at some bargain airline. Are we clear?" Ryan held her gaze steadily. "Crystal clear, Captain. Safety and procedure. That's what I'm here for." Something flickered across Lena's face. Irritation, maybe, or the particular frustration of someone who'd just realized their intimidation hadn't landed the way they'd intended. "Just stay out of my way and we'll be fine. Briefings at 0900. Don't be late." She turned and walked out before Ryan could respond. He sat back down slowly, his coffee now cold in his hand. Across the room, one of the flight attendants, a young woman named Jennifer, whose name tag proclaimed her a 5-year veteran, caught his eye and gave him a sympathetic smile. "Don't take it personally," she said quietly, gathering her materials. "Captain Ward is particular about her crews." "Particular how?" Jennifer hesitated, clearly weighing whether to say more. "She goes through first officers pretty quickly, requests a lot of reassignments, has very specific ideas about how things should be done." "And those ideas are?" "Her way." Jennifer's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Good luck up there." The pre-flight briefing was exactly what Ryan expected. Lena Ward talking for 20 minutes straight about her expectations, her procedures, her preferred communication protocols, her tolerance levels for various forms of what she called Copilot initiative, which seemed to mean any action taken without her explicit approval. Ryan took notes and said nothing. He'd worked with difficult captains before. The key was competence and calm. Do your job perfectly, give them nothing to criticize, and eventually even the most territorial pilot would relax. At least, that was the theory. By 8:45, they were conducting the exterior inspection together, though together was generous given that Lena stayed 3 steps ahead of him the entire time, barely glancing at the components she was supposed to be checking. Ryan followed behind, conducting his own thorough review. He checked the tires for proper inflation and wear patterns. He inspected the landing gear struts for hydraulic leaks. He examined the engine cowlings for damage or loose panels. He ran his hands along the wing surfaces, looking for anything that might disrupt airflow. That's when he found it. Beneath the starboard wing, near the inboard flap mechanism, there was a small pool of hydraulic fluid on the ground. Not a puddle exactly, but more than condensation. Ryan crouched down and looked up at the underside of the wing assembly. There, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, was a slow drip coming from a connection point in the hydraulic line. "Captain Ward," Ryan kept his voice level, professional. "I need you to look at something." Lena turned back with visible impatience. "What is it, Cole? We're on a schedule." "Hydraulic leak, starboard wing, inboard flap assembly." She walked back, her stride radiating annoyance. She glanced up at where Ryan was pointing for maybe 2 seconds. "That's residual from the last service, normal seepage, nothing to worry about." "It's actively dripping, Captain. That's not residual." "Are you questioning my assessment?" Lena's voice dropped into a dangerous register. "I've done 10,000 pre-flights, Cole. I know the difference between a service residue and an actual leak." Ryan pulled out his phone and took several photographs of the fluid on the ground and the drip point above. "I'm documenting a potential safety issue, standard procedure." "You're wasting time is what you're doing." Lena crossed her arms. "We have a departure slot in 45 minutes. We have a full passenger load, including a state senator and his staff. We have weather moving in that's going to delay us 6 hours if we don't get airborne in the next window. And you want to ground this aircraft because you saw some hydraulic fluid that's probably from a servicing 3 days ago? I want to have maintenance verify it before we take 147 people into the air." The silence that followed was the kind that fills with pressure, like a storm system building. Around them, ground crew continued their work, oblivious to the confrontation developing under the wing of Flight 447. Lena stepped closer to Ryan, close enough that he could smell her coffee breath. "Let me explain something to you about how this works, Cole. I am the pilot in command of this aircraft. I make the determination about airworthiness. Not you, not maintenance unless I call them. Me. And I'm telling you right now that there is no safety issue here. What we do have is a new co-pilot who apparently wants to make a name for himself by second-guessing his captain on his very first flight. That's the real issue." Ryan didn't step back. The real issue is that hydraulic fluid doesn't drip from properly sealed connections. The real issue is that we're required by federal regulation to document and investigate any anomaly discovered during pre-flight inspection. The real issue is that if we take off with a compromised hydraulic system and it fails in flight, we could lose control of multiple flight surfaces simultaneously. "Are you actually lecturing me about flight safety?" Lena's voice rose now, loud enough that a baggage handler 20 yards away looked over. "You, with your 8 years at some third-rate international carrier that couldn't even stay in business?" You're going to tell me, a captain with 28 years and a spotless safety record, how to do my job. I'm asking you to let maintenance verify what I found. That's all. No. Lena's response was immediate and flat. We're boarding in 20 minutes and we're departing on time. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with operations after we land in Dallas. Until then, you will follow my instructions or you will be removed from this flight. Do I make myself clear? Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Maya, 12 years old, waiting for him to come home tonight. He thought about the 147 passengers who would soon be trusting both of them with their lives. He thought about the 3 flight attendants who would be working in a pressurized aluminum tube 7 miles above the earth, completely dependent on the competence and judgment of the people in the cockpit. Then he thought about the hydraulic fluid dripping slowly onto the concrete beneath the wing. I need to make a call, he said quietly. You need to get in that cockpit and prep for departure. After I make a call. Ryan walked away before Lena could respond. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for Coastal Airways operations, then paused with his thumb over the call button. There was another number he could call. A different number that would change everything about this conversation. But using it would reveal things he'd carefully kept quiet for 8 months, things that would shift every relationship he had at this company in ways he couldn't predict. He made the operations call. Coastal Ops, this is Denise. Hi Denise, this is First Officer Cole on Flight 447. I need to report a potential maintenance issue discovered during pre-flight inspection. There was a pause. What's the nature of the issue? Active hydraulic leak on the starboard wing flap assembly. I'm requesting a maintenance inspection before departure. Another pause, longer this time. Is Captain Ward aware of this report? Yes. She disagrees with my assessment, but I'm documenting it per standard procedure. Hold, please. The line went silent for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. When Denise came back, her voice was carefully neutral. Maintenance is currently tied up with 2 other aircraft. They estimate 90 minutes before they can get to you. Captain Ward is calling into operations now on another line. Can you describe exactly what you observed? Ryan walked Denise through the details while simultaneously emailing her the photographs he'd taken. Behind him, he could hear Lena's voice rising in pitch, though he couldn't make out the words. Other crew members were starting to notice now. Jennifer and the other flight attendants had paused their boarding prep. The gate agent was looking out the window with a worried expression. Okay, Denise said finally. I've logged your report. Maintenance supervisor is reviewing your photos now. Stand by. Ryan stood there in the morning sun, his phone pressed to his ear, while his first flight at Coastal Airways disintegrated around him. He'd known this was a possibility when he took the job here. He'd known that flying under someone else's command meant accepting their authority, even when you disagreed. But he'd also known from the very beginning that there were some lines you didn't cross, some compromises you didn't make. Not with hydraulic systems, not at altitude, not ever. Cole. Lena Ward was marching toward him like a missile locked on target. I just got off the phone with operations. You went over my head. You reported a non-existent maintenance issue to ground my aircraft. Do you have any idea what you've just done? I reported what I observed. That's my job. Your job is to support the pilot in command, not undermine her authority with operations. My job is to ensure this aircraft is safe to fly. Based on what expertise? Your 8 years at a bankrupt airline? Your couple of weeks at Coastal? Lena was in his face now, her finger jabbing toward his chest. You don't get to make this call, Cole. You don't have the experience. You don't have the authority. You don't have the right. I have the responsibility. Ryan's voice stayed level, quiet. Same as you, same as every pilot who signs off on a pre-flight inspection. You're done here. Lena pulled out her own phone. I'm calling the chief pilot. I'm having you removed from this flight and I'm filing a formal complaint for insubordination and interference with flight operations. You're grounded, Cole, effectively immediately. That's your right, Captain. Damn right it is. Lena was already dialing. You just ended your career at Coastal before it even started. Hope that hydraulic fluid you imagined was worth it. Ryan didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would change anything at this point. He'd made his choice and Lena had made hers, and now they would both live with the consequences. He walked back toward the terminal, aware of eyes following him from every direction. The baggage handlers had stopped working. The gate agent was on her phone. Jennifer and the other flight attendants were watching through the window. Inside the terminal, he found an empty seat near the gate and sat down to wait for whatever came next. His phone buzzed with a text from Denise in operations. Maintenance en route. Chief Pilot wants to speak with you. Do not leave the gate area. Ryan typed back a quick acknowledgement and then opened his messages to check on Maya. She'd texted him an hour ago, a photo of the breakfast he'd made her before he left for work, with the caption, Dad's pancakes, Tim. School cafeteria slop. Have a good flight. He smiled despite everything and sent back a heart emoji. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Coastal Airways, Chief Pilot. This is Ryan Cole. Cole, this is Captain Brennan. The chief pilot's voice was clipped, businesslike. I've been briefed on the situation with Flight 447. I need you to explain to me, in your own words, exactly what happened during that pre-flight inspection. Ryan went through it again, methodically. The fluid on the ground, the visible drip, the photographs. Lena's dismissal, the call to operations. He kept his tone factual, professional, completely devoid of emotion or accusation. When he finished, Brennan was quiet for a moment. And Captain Ward maintains this was residual fluid from a recent service? That's her position, yes. But you disagree. I observed active dripping from a connection point. That's inconsistent with residual fluid from a service that occurred 3 days ago. Captain Ward has 28 years of experience, Cole. She's flown for this company for 15 years without a single incident. She says you're overreacting, that you're causing an unnecessary delay that's going to cost this company tens of thousands of dollars and strand a plane full of passengers. Ryan said nothing. There was nothing to say. On the other hand, Brennan continued, you followed proper procedure by documenting and reporting what you observed. That's exactly what we train pilots to do. So now I've got a captain who thinks her co-pilot is grandstanding and a co-pilot who thinks his captain is ignoring a safety issue. You see my problem here? Yes, sir. Here's what's going to happen. Maintenance is on their way to inspect that aircraft right now. If they find a legitimate leak, then you made the right call and Captain Ward made an error in judgment. If they find nothing but residual fluid, then you wasted everyone's time and grounded an aircraft unnecessarily. Either way, you're not flying today. Captain Ward has requested your removal, and I'm granting that request. Understood. I'm not making a determination about who's right until I see the maintenance report, but I will tell you this. We don't take kindly to co-pilots who can't work with their captains. Chemistry matters in a cockpit. Trust matters. And right now, that trust is broken. So even if you were right about the hydraulic fluid, you might have just made yourself unflyable at this company. You get what I'm saying? I get it. Good. Stay at the gate until maintenance completes their inspection. Then come to my office. We'll have a conversation about your future here. The line went dead. Ryan sat in the uncomfortable gate chair and watched through the window as a maintenance truck pulled up to Flight 447. 2 technicians got out and conferred briefly with Lena Ward, who gestured emphatically toward the wing while obviously talking rapidly. One of the technicians nodded and moved to set up a work platform while the other began pulling diagnostic equipment from the truck. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. If they found nothing, Ryan would be the overzealous new guy who'd caused a massive delay on his first day. He'd probably be fired, or at best relegated to such junior assignments that he'd never climb out. Maya would ask him why he'd quit another job, and he'd have to explain that sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. If they found the leak, he'd be vindicated. But Lena would be humiliated. And a humiliated captain with 28 years of seniority and 15 years at the company would make an enemy Ryan couldn't afford. Either way, he'd just blown up the quiet, invisible life he'd been trying to build here. The lead maintenance technician, Ryan could see his name badge from here, Rodriguez, positioned himself under the wing with a high-intensity work light and began examining the connection point Ryan had photographed. He spent several minutes there, occasionally calling his partner over to look at something. They conferred. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and began typing notes. Then he did something that made Ryan's stomach drop. He placed a collection pan under the connection point and marked its position with what looked like engineering tape. Then he pulled out a pressure gauge and began connecting it to a test port somewhere in the hydraulic system. That wasn't the procedure for checking residual fluid. That was the procedure for testing system integrity under pressure. Rodriguez worked for another 10 minutes, his movements methodical and unhurried. Then he disconnected his equipment, climbed down from the platform, and walked directly toward the terminal. He passed right by Lena Ward without stopping to speak to her. Ryan's phone rang again. Brennan. Cole, you still at the gate? Yes, sir. Rodriguez just called me directly. Says there's definitely a leak. Says it's at a fitting connection and it's not catastrophic, but it's active and it shouldn't be there. Says if you'd missed it and taken off, you probably would have been fine for this flight. But it would have gotten worse, and within another 3 or 4 flights, you could have had a real problem. Ryan closed his eyes and felt something unclench in his chest. So you made the right call, Brennan continued. Captain Ward made a mistake, a significant mistake. Now we've got a grounded aircraft that's going to need repair before it can fly. We've got 147 passengers we need to rebook. And we've got a captain who just overruled a legitimate safety concern from her co-pilot. You see where this is going? I do. Captain Ward is being removed from Flight 447. We're bringing in Captain Morrison to take the aircraft once maintenance clears it. But here's the thing, Cole. Captain Ward is filing a formal complaint against you anyway. She's claiming you deliberately sabotaged the pre-flight inspection to undermine her authority. She's saying you're insubordinate and that you created a hostile work environment in the cockpit. Ryan felt that brief moment of relief evaporate. That's not what happened. I know that. Rodriguez knows that. Anyone who looks at the timeline knows that. But Ward has friends in this company. She's got seniority. And she's going to make your life hell if you stay here. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. All right. Is there anything I should know about you, Cole? Anything about your background or your qualifications or your position that might be relevant to how this situation unfolds? Because if Captain Ward is going to come after you, I need to know what ammunition she might find. Ryan sat very still. This was the moment, the question he'd been waiting for since the day he accepted this job. He could tell the truth now and change everything, or he could stay quiet and let events play out as they would. He thought about Maya again, about the promise he'd made to himself when he took this position, that he would do it right, do it clean, prove himself on merit alone without trading on anything else. But he also thought about Lena Ward's face when she dismissed his concerns, about her finger jabbing toward his chest, about her absolute certainty that her experience and authority trumped basic safety procedure. There might be one thing, Ryan said quietly, but I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Then get to my office, now. 20 minutes later, Ryan was sitting across a desk from Captain Brennan, a lean man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of weather-beaten face that came from decades in cockpits. Brennan's office was exactly what you'd expect. Aviation photos on the walls, model aircraft on the shelves, certifications and commendations in frames, a window overlooking the terminal ramps. All right, Cole. Brennan leaned back in his chair. What do I need to know? Ryan pulled a folder from his flight bag and slid it across the desk. Inside were documents he'd hoped never to use this way. Stock certificates, operating agreements, partnership papers. Brennan opened the folder and went very still. He read for a long moment, then looked up at Ryan with an expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. You're a co-owner of this company. Minority stakeholder, 10% equity, part of the restructuring deal when Coastal bought assets from Pacific West 3 years ago. You've been flying as a first officer for 8 months and you never mentioned this? I wanted to earn my position, not have it handed to me because of paperwork. Brennan stared at him. You could have been flying as a captain. You could have been in management. Instead, you've been taking orders from pilots with less experience and getting paid first officer wages. Why? Because being an owner doesn't make me a better pilot. Experience and competence do. I wanted to learn this company from the inside, fly the routes, understand the culture. You can't do that from an office or a left seat that was given to you. Does anyone else know about this? The CEO knows. The board knows. HR knows I'm an employee with ownership interest. But nobody on the flight line knows. I asked that it be kept confidential. And now? Ryan met his eyes steadily. Now I'm telling you because Captain Ward is about to escalate this into something bigger than a disagreement about hydraulic fluid. And when she does, when she starts making accusations and filing complaints and trying to damage my career, I want you to understand who you're dealing with. You could have avoided all of this. You could have let the leak slide, made the flight, landed safe, and never had this confrontation. No, Ryan said quietly. I really couldn't have. Brennan closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. You just put me in an impossible position, Cole. If I defend you, people are going to say it's because you're an owner. If I don't defend you, I'm letting a captain with a safety violation intimidate a co-pilot who made the right call. And if this becomes public, if the media gets hold of the fact that a co-owner of Coastal Airways was refused by his own captain for reporting a safety issue, this company is going to get destroyed in the press. I don't want it to become public. Then what do you want? I want to know that the next first officer who spots a safety issue won't be afraid to report it because they saw what happened to me. I want to know that captains understand they don't have the authority to override safety procedures just because they have seniority. And I want to keep flying for this company the same way I have been, as a co-pilot who does his job and goes home to his daughter. That's not going to be possible anymore. Not after today. Then I'll deal with that. But I won't apologize for documenting a hydraulic leak, and I won't pretend Captain Ward was right to dismiss it. Brennan looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, an aircraft pushed back from its gate and began its slow taxi toward the runway. The morning sun caught its wings and turned them bright as mirrors. All right, Brennan said finally. Here's what's going to happen. We're opening a formal investigation into the incident. That means statements from both you and Captain Ward. It means reviewing the maintenance records. It means looking at Ward's history with other co-pilots, because this isn't the first time she's had conflicts. And it means, whether you like it or not, your ownership status is going to become relevant. I understand. I'm grounding you pending the investigation, not as punishment, as protection. If we keep you on the flight line right now, every interaction you have with every captain is going to be colored by what happened today. Better to step back, let things settle, and figure out what comes next. Ryan nodded slowly. He'd expected this. Hoped against it, but expected it. And Cole? Thank you for reporting that leak. Rodriguez says it wasn't critical yet, but it was heading that way. You might have saved lives today, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Ryan stood and picked up his flight bag. Just doing the job, Captain. He walked out of Brennan's office and through the operations center, past the dispatchers and coordinators who'd heard enough rumors by now to stop their conversations and watch him leave. He made it to his car, got inside, and sat there in the parking lot for a long time before starting the engine. His phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer, the flight attendant. I don't know what happened exactly, but I want you to know that crew saw you trying to report something and saw Ward shut you down. If you need statements, I'll give one. So will the others. That wasn't right. Ryan typed back, Thank you. That means more than you know. Then he drove home through morning traffic, his mind already moving ahead to the conversation he'd have to have with Maya, the investigation he'd have to endure, the future that had suddenly become completely uncertain. He'd done the right thing, he knew that absolutely, but the right thing had just cost him everything he'd been trying to build. And the battle, he suspected, was only beginning. The investigation began on Monday morning in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and recycled air. Ryan arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the same professional attire he wore for flights, carrying a leather folder that contained his own documentation of the incident. He'd spent the weekend organizing everything, his photographs, his timeline, his written statement, copies of the relevant federal regulations that supported his actions. Maya had asked him on Saturday morning why he wasn't going to work. He'd sat her down at the kitchen table and explained it as simply as he could, that he'd found something wrong with an airplane and reported it, but the captain disagreed with him, and now the company needed to figure out what actually happened. But you were right, weren't you? Maya had asked, her 12-year-old face serious in that way that always reminded him of her mother. The maintenance people found the leak. Yes, I was right about that. Right about, then why are you in trouble? Because being right isn't always enough, honey. Sometimes being right makes people angry, especially if it makes them feel like they were wrong. She'd thought about that for a moment, then nodded with a wisdom beyond her years. Like when I corrected Mrs. Patterson about the Civil War dates in front of the whole class, and she gave me detention anyway. Exactly like that, except with higher stakes. Now Ryan sat in the conference room and waited while others filtered in. Captain Brennan arrived first, followed by Sandra Kovich from HR, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for taking no nonsense from anyone. Then came Marcus Webb, the company's legal counsel, carrying a stack of files that suggested this investigation had already generated significant paperwork. Lena Ward entered last, accompanied by her own lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit whose presence immediately elevated the tension in the room. Lena didn't look at Ryan. She took a seat on the opposite side of the table and began arranging her own materials with deliberate precision. Brennan opened the meeting with practiced formality. We're here to conduct a formal investigation into the events of January 11th regarding Flight 447. This is an internal company matter, but given the nature of the allegations and counter-allegations, we're treating it with the seriousness it deserves. Everything said in this room is confidential and will be used solely for the purpose of determining what happened and what actions, if any, need to be taken going forward. He looked at both Ryan and Lena in turn. I want to be clear about something from the start. This is not about who wins or loses. This is about understanding what went wrong so we can prevent it from happening again. We have a duty to our passengers, our crew, and ourselves to get this right. So I expect complete honesty and professionalism from everyone in this room. Are we clear? Both pilots nodded. Good. Captain Ward, you filed a formal complaint alleging that First Officer Cole engaged in insubordinate behavior, deliberately undermined your authority as pilot in command, and created a hostile work environment. Would you like to speak to those allegations? Lena's lawyer leaned over and whispered something to her. She nodded and then looked directly at Brennan, still not acknowledging Ryan's presence. What happened on January 11th was a clear case of a co-pilot who decided he knew better than his captain, despite having a fraction of her experience, Lena began, her voice controlled and measured. I conducted a thorough pre-flight inspection, as I have done thousands of times over my 28-year career. During that inspection, I observed a small amount of hydraulic fluid under the starboard wing, residual fluid from a recent service, which is completely normal and poses no safety concern whatsoever. She pulled out her own tablet and brought up a document. I noted this in my inspection log and determined the aircraft was airworthy. First Officer Cole, on his very first flight with me, chose to question my assessment. Rather than deferring to my experience and authority, he unilaterally contacted operations and reported a maintenance emergency that did not exist. This action grounded the aircraft, delayed our departure, inconvenienced 147 passengers, and cost this company approximately $43,000 in rebooking fees, crew overtime, and lost revenue. Sandra, from HR, was taking notes. Did you explain to First Officer Cole why you believe the fluid was residual from service? I did. Multiple times. He chose not to accept my professional judgment. And when he said he wanted to contact operations, what was your response? I instructed him that as pilot in command, I had made the airworthiness determination and that we were proceeding with the flight. He ignored that direct instruction and contacted operations anyway. Marcus Webb, the legal counsel, spoke up. Captain Ward, when maintenance subsequently inspected the aircraft, they found an active leak at the connection fitting. How do you reconcile that with your assessment that it was residual fluid? Lena's jaw tightened slightly. Maintenance found a minor seepage at a fitting, not an active leak. The distinction is important. What they found would not have posed any safety risk for that flight or several flights thereafter. It was the kind of thing that gets noted during routine inspection and addressed during the next scheduled maintenance cycle. But it was leaking, Webb pressed. The maintenance report specifically uses the word active. Maintenance erred on the side of caution, as they should, but their findings do not validate First Officer Cole's insubordination. He made a unilateral decision that superseded my authority without having the experience or knowledge to make that call properly. Brennan looked at Ryan. First Officer Cole, do you want to respond to Captain Ward's characterization of events? Ryan opened his folder and pulled out the photographs he'd taken. He slid them across the table so everyone could see them. These images show hydraulic fluid pooled on the ground beneath the starboard wing and a visible drip from the connection fitting above. I took these at 0843, approximately 17 minutes before scheduled departure. The fluid was actively dripping, approximately 1 drop every 8 to 10 seconds. He pulled out another document. This is the maintenance log from the service Captain Ward referenced, which occurred on January 8th at approximately 1400 hours. That's 3 days and nearly 72 hours before our inspection. Hydraulic fluid does not remain liquid and continue dripping for 72 hours after a service, unless there is an ongoing leak from a pressurized system. Sandra leaned forward to examine the photographs more closely. These are very clear images, First Officer Cole. When did you first observe the fluid? During the exterior inspection, I was following Captain Ward through the standard checklist. When I reached the starboard wing, I noticed the pooling and looked up to identify the source. That's when I observed the drip. And you brought this to Captain Ward's attention? Immediately, I called her over and showed her what I'd found. What was her response? Ryan chose his words carefully. She looked at it briefly and stated it was residual from the recent service. I expressed my concern that the drip pattern was inconsistent with residual fluid. She told me I was wasting time and that we needed to proceed with departure. Did you accept her assessment at that point? No, I took the photographs and informed her I was documenting the observation for operations. Lena's lawyer spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and practiced. And that's when you bypassed the chain of command and contacted operations directly against the explicit instructions of your pilot in command? Ryan met the lawyer's eyes steadily. I followed Federal Regulation 14 CFR 91.7, which states that the pilot in command shall not operate an aircraft that is in a condition for safe flight. As a certificated pilot, I have an independent responsibility to ensure airworthiness. When I observed what I believed to be an active hydraulic leak, and the captain disagreed with that assessment, I had an obligation to document and report it to maintenance authority. You had an obligation to follow your captain's orders. Not when those orders contradict federal safety regulations and my own professional judgment about airworthiness. The lawyer smiled slightly, like he'd been waiting for that answer. Your professional judgment, based on how many years of experience, First Officer Cole? 15 years commercial aviation. And how many of those years were spent as pilot in command of aircraft in this class? Ryan paused. This was the trap. 6 years as captain at Pacific West International. Pacific West, the carrier that went bankrupt in 2022? Yes. And since then, you've been working as a first officer at various regional carriers? Yes. So you went from captain to co-pilot. That's an unusual career trajectory, isn't it? Most pilots move up, not down. Ryan felt the conversation shifting beneath him. The bankruptcy scattered a lot of experienced pilots into lower positions. It's not uncommon in the industry. But it suggests something about your judgment, doesn't it? If you were such an excellent captain, surely you would have found another captain position rather than accepting demotion to first officer. Brennan interrupted. Counselor, First Officer Cole's career history isn't relevant to whether he properly reported a safety concern. I disagree, Captain Brennan. If we're evaluating whether First Officer Cole had the experience and judgment to override his captain's airworthiness determination, then his track record is absolutely relevant. And that track record shows a pattern of declining positions and questionable decision-making. Ryan felt his hands clench under the table, but kept his voice level. My decision to work as a first officer was deliberate. I wanted to learn new aircraft, new procedures, new company cultures. That's not declining. That's continuing education. Or it's an inability to hold a captain's position. Sandra from HR cut in sharply. That's enough. We're not here to litigate First Officer Cole's entire career. We're here to determine whether he followed proper procedure on January 11th and whether Captain Ward's response was appropriate. The lawyer sat back, but Ryan could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The seed had been planted. Whatever else came out of this investigation, there would always be the question of why Ryan Cole was flying as a co-pilot when he'd once been a captain. Brennan redirected the conversation. Let's talk about the maintenance findings. I have Rodriguez's full report here. He states unambiguously that the leak was active, that it originated from a compromised seal at the fitting connection, and that while not immediately catastrophic, it would have progressively worsened with each pressurization cycle. He estimates that within 3 to 5 additional flights, the leak could have become severe enough to impact flap functionality. He looked at Lena. Captain Ward, does that change your assessment of the situation? Lena's expression remained unchanged. Maintenance found what they found. I stand by my original assessment that the aircraft was safe for that particular flight. If the leak would have worsened over subsequent flights, it would have been caught during routine post-flight inspection. You're confident of that? I am. Even though you missed it during your own pre-flight inspection? The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Lena's composure cracked just slightly, a tightness around her eyes that suggested she understood the implications of Brennan's question. I did not miss it, she said carefully. I observed it and made a judgment call based on my experience. A judgment call that maintenance says was incorrect. Maintenance has the luxury of time and diagnostic equipment. I had a departure window and a plane full of passengers. Marcus Webb leaned forward. Captain Ward, I need you to understand something. This company's liability exposure if that aircraft had taken off with a known hydraulic issue is astronomical. If something had happened in flight, if the leak had worsened faster than anticipated, if it had led to a control surface failure, we would be facing wrongful death lawsuits, FAA violations, criminal negligence charges. The fact that First Officer Cole documented and reported the issue is quite possibly the only thing standing between this company and complete destruction. Lena's lawyer started to object, but Webb held up his hand. I'm not exaggerating. We have photographic evidence that both pilots were aware of hydraulic fluid under the aircraft. We have testimony that one pilot reported it and one pilot dismissed it. If we had flown and something had gone wrong, every one of those photographs would have been Exhibit A in a criminal trial. He turned to Ryan. First Officer Cole, I need to ask you something directly. When Captain Ward told you to proceed with the flight despite your concerns, did you feel pressured to comply? Ryan considered the question. I felt the weight of authority. Captain Ward made it clear that questioning her judgment was inappropriate and that there would be professional consequences if I persisted. Did you feel afraid for your job? I felt that making the call to operations would damage my standing at this company. Yes. But you made it anyway. Yes. Why? Ryan looked at Webb, then at Brennan, then finally at Lena Ward. Because 147 people were about to trust us with their lives. Because 3 flight attendants were about to depend on our judgment at 30,000 feet. Because my daughter was waiting for me to come home that night, and I needed to be able to look her in the eye and tell her I did my job right. The room went quiet. Outside the conference room windows, Ryan could see aircraft moving on the taxiways, following the painted lines that kept them safe, following the procedures that had been written in blood over decades of aviation history. Sandra broke the silence. Captain Ward, I need to ask you about your history with first officers. In the past 3 years, you've requested reassignment from 7 different co-pilots. That's significantly higher than the company average. Lena's composure returned, cool and professional. I have high standards. Not every co-pilot meets them. Can you describe what those standards are? Competence, efficiency, respect for experience, understanding of chain of command. And the co-pilots who didn't meet those standards, what specifically did they do wrong? Various things. Excessive questioning of my decisions, slow response times, poor communication, general inability to function smoothly in a cockpit environment where I'm pilot in command. Sandra pulled out another document. I have the reassignment requests here. First Officer Martinez, the one First Officer Cole was temporarily replacing, requested transfer away from flying with you after only 6 weeks. In his confidential statement to HR, he said, and I quote, Captain Ward creates an environment where co-pilots are afraid to speak up about safety concerns because any question or observation is treated as insubordination. Lena's face flushed slightly. Martinez was oversensitive and couldn't handle normal cockpit dynamics. First Officer Chen, before him, lasted 3 months. She reported that you, quote, dismissed multiple legitimate maintenance concerns and created a culture of intimidation in the cockpit. Chen was unreliable and frequently second-guessed routine decisions. First Officer Thompson reported that you, quote, prioritized schedule adherence over safety protocols. Thompson was incompetent. Sandra looked up from the documents. Captain Ward, 7 different co-pilots over 3 years have all made similar complaints about your cockpit management style. At what point do we stop assuming they're all incompetent and start considering that there might be a pattern in your behavior? Lena's lawyer put his hand on her arm, a clear signal to stop talking. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. I maintain high standards because aviation demands high standards. If that makes me difficult to work with, so be it. I've never had an incident, never had a violation, never had a safety complaint that was substantiated. My record speaks for itself. Brennan looked tired. Your record shows 28 years without an incident. That's commendable, but it also shows an increasing pattern of conflict with subordinate crew members. And now we have a situation where a legitimate safety concern was dismissed and a co-pilot was threatened with professional consequences for reporting it. That's not high standards, Captain Ward. That's a systemic problem. I disagree with that characterization completely. I'm sure you do. Brennan closed the file in front of him. Here's what I know for certain. First Officer Cole observed a hydraulic leak. He documented it. He reported it through proper channels. Maintenance confirmed the leak was real and active. Federal regulations required him to do exactly what he did. And despite all of that, you're sitting here arguing that he was wrong to report it. He looked at Ryan. First Officer Cole, is there anything else you want to add to your statement? Ryan had been quiet for most of the meeting, letting the evidence and testimony speak for itself. But now, with Brennan's direct question, he felt the weight of everything that had been left unsaid pressing down on him. Just one thing, Ryan said quietly. I didn't go into that pre-flight inspection looking for problems with Captain Ward. I didn't want conflict. I just wanted to do the job right. But when I found that leak, I had a choice. Follow procedure and risk my career, or ignore it and risk lives. That's not really a choice at all. And if this company is going to punish pilots for choosing safety over convenience, then maybe I'm not in the right place. He paused, then added, but I don't think that's what Coastal Airways is about. I think this company has good people who care about doing things right. And I think this investigation will show that following safety protocols is what matters, regardless of who gets embarrassed in the process. Lena's lawyer stood abruptly. Captain Ward has cooperated fully with this investigation. She's provided her statement, answered all questions, and maintained her professional obligations throughout. Unless there are formal charges being brought, we're done here. Brennan nodded slowly. We'll complete our review and issue findings within the week. Both of you will be notified of the outcome and any actions being taken. Until then, both of you remain on administrative leave with full pay. This meeting is concluded. The room cleared quickly. Lena and her lawyer left first, conferring in low voices as they walked out. Sandra gathered her materials and gave Ryan a brief nod that might have been sympathy or solidarity. Marcus Webb shook Ryan's hand and told him he'd done the right thing, which was something, but didn't change the knot of anxiety in Ryan's stomach. Brennan asked Ryan to stay behind. When they were alone, the chief pilot walked to the window and stood looking out at the tarmac for a long moment. You know what bothers me most about all this? He said finally. What's that? How easily it could have gone the other way. If you'd been a less experienced pilot, or a younger one, or someone who needed this job so badly they couldn't afford to lose it, you might have just gotten in that cockpit and made the flight. And maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe the leak would have held for that trip and been caught later. But maybe it wouldn't have. Maybe we'd be having a very different conversation right now. He turned to face Ryan. I've been in this industry for 40 years. I've seen crashes caused by mechanical failures that were observed and dismissed. I've read accident reports where the black box shows co-pilots trying to tell their captains something was wrong and being overruled. Every time it happens, we say, never again, and we create new procedures and new training. But procedures don't mean anything if people are afraid to use them. What happens now? Ryan asked. Now? Now I finish the investigation. Now I write a report that's probably going to end Lena Ward's career with this company. Now I figure out how to prevent this from happening again with our other captains who think seniority equals infallibility. He sat down across from Ryan. And now I have to decide what to do about you. You know about my ownership stake. I do. Have since you started, but I kept it confidential like you asked because I respected what you were trying to do. Except now it's relevant, whether we like it or not. How so? Because when word gets out that a co-owner of this company was dismissed by his captain for reporting a safety issue, The optics are going to be catastrophic. The media will have a field day. The FAA will probably launch their own investigation. Every pilot in this company is going to wonder whether they can trust the safety culture here. Ryan felt something cold settle in his chest. I never wanted my ownership status to be part of this. I know you didn't, but sometimes what we want doesn't matter. Sometimes the story is bigger than we are. Brennan pulled out a folder from his briefcase. The board met yesterday. They asked me to give you this. Ryan opened the folder. Inside was a formal letter on company letterhead signed by the CEO and all board members. He read it twice before looking up. They want me to take a permanent position as Director of Safety Operations. They want you to rebuild our safety culture from the ground up. New training protocols, new reporting systems, new accountability measures for pilots who dismiss legitimate concerns. They want you to make sure what happened with Lena Ward never happens again. I'm a pilot, not an administrator. You're both. And right now, this company needs someone who understands both sides. Someone who knows what it's like in the cockpit, but also has the authority to change things systematically. Ryan stared at the letter. It was everything he'd worked for in one sense. A chance to make a real difference in aviation safety, to build systems that protected crews and passengers. But it was also the end of the quiet, invisible life he'd been trying to maintain. The end of just being another co-pilot doing his job. I need time to think about this. I understand, but Ryan, and I'm calling you Ryan now, not First Officer Cole, you need to understand something. What you did on that tarmac, standing up to Ward and making that call to operations, even though you knew it would cost you, that took more courage than anything I've seen in years. That's the kind of leadership we need. Not someone who hides behind rank and seniority, but someone who does the right thing even when it's hard. Brennan stood and headed for the door, then paused. Think about it. Talk to your daughter. But don't take too long. Because one way or another, this story is going to come out. And when it does, I'd rather have you standing with us than watching from the outside. Ryan sat alone in the conference room for a long time after Brennan left. Through the window, he watched aircraft taxi and depart, each one following the same procedures, trusting the same systems, depending on the same commitment to safety that had kept aviation the safest form of transportation ever devised. He thought about Maya, who deserved a father who came home every night. He thought about the co-pilots who'd flown with Lena Ward before him and been too afraid to speak up. He thought about the passengers on Flight 447 who would never know how close they'd come to boarding an aircraft with a compromised hydraulic system. And he thought about the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When he opened it, he found a message from Jennifer, the flight attendant. Don't know if this matters, but the whole crew is behind you. We all saw what happened. We all know you did the right thing. Whatever comes next, you've got people who will speak up for you. Ryan typed back, that matters more than you know. Thank you. Then he picked up the folder with the board's offer, tucked it under his arm, and walked out of the conference room into whatever came next. The investigation was over, but the real work was just beginning. Ryan stood in the parking lot for several minutes after leaving the conference room, the folder containing the board's offer pressed against his chest like a shield. The afternoon sun was harsh and unforgiving, the kind of light that revealed every crack in the pavement, every oil stain, every imperfection that softer illumination might have hidden. He pulled out his phone and called the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Dad? You're calling in the middle of the day. What's wrong? Maya's voice carried that edge of concern that 12-year-olds got when their single parents deviated from routine. Ryan had trained her too well to notice patterns, to identify anomalies, to ask questions when things didn't add up. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. I just finished a meeting and I wanted to hear your voice. How was school? Boring. We had a substitute in math who doesn't actually know math, which was pretty entertaining. But Dad, seriously, what's going on? You never call during the day unless something happened. Ryan smiled despite everything. Can a father just want to talk to his brilliant daughter? A father can. You don't. You're too busy making mental checklists of everything you need to do before you can relax enough to make spontaneous phone calls. So what happened? He leaned against his car and looked up at the sky where contrails from departed aircraft drew temporary lines across the blue. The investigation wrapped up. They made me an offer. What kind of offer? A job, a different job. Not flying. Managing safety operations for the whole company. Building new training programs, creating better reporting systems, making sure what happened with Captain Ward doesn't happen again. There was a pause while Maya processed this. That sounds important. It is. But you don't want to do it. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. I can hear it in your voice. You want to fly, not sit in meetings and write reports. Ryan closed his eyes. Sometimes having a perceptive daughter was inconvenient. It's more complicated than that. Is it though? You love flying. You've always loved flying. Why would you give that up? Because sometimes doing the right thing means giving up what you love to do, what matters more. That's a very dad thing to say. I am a dad. A dad who's avoiding the question, do you want this job or not? Ryan thought about how to answer that honestly. I want to make sure other pilots don't have to choose between their careers and safety. I want to build systems that protect people. I want to use what happened to me to create something better. But do I want to spend my days in offices instead of cockpits? No, not really. Then don't do it. It's not that simple, Maya. Why not? You're always telling me that if something doesn't feel right, I should trust my instincts. You're always saying that the important thing is being true to yourself, not making other people happy. So why doesn't that apply to you? Because I'm not just thinking about myself. I'm thinking about all the co-pilots who might fly with captains like Ward in the future. I'm thinking about passengers who deserve to know that safety comes first. I'm thinking about creating change that lasts longer than one incident. Maya was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its challenging edge and taken on something softer, more thoughtful. Mom used to say you had a hero complex, that you always wanted to save everyone even when it cost you too much. Is that what this is? The mention of his late wife hit Ryan like unexpected turbulence. She'd been gone for 4 years, but Maya still brought her up sometimes, usually when she was trying to make a point that she knew would land harder with her mother's voice behind it. Maybe, Ryan admitted, but your mom also taught me that having the ability to help means having the responsibility to try. And right now, I have the ability to change things at Coastal in ways that other people can't. Because you're an owner. You know about that? Dad, I'm 12, not stupid. I've seen the paperwork in your office. I've heard you on phone calls with lawyers. I figured it out like 2 months after we moved here. Ryan felt something between pride and exasperation. And you didn't mention it? You clearly didn't want to talk about it. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Are you ready now? Getting there. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated. But here's what I think. If you take this job just because you feel guilty or responsible or like you owe it to people, you're going to hate it. And if you hate it, you're going to be miserable. And if you're miserable, I'm going to be miserable because you'll bring that home every day. So maybe instead of thinking about what you should do, you should think about what you actually want to do. Ryan opened his eyes and looked at the folder in his hand. When did you get so wise? I have an excellent teacher. He's this pilot guy who's always talking about making good decisions under pressure. You'd like him. I love you, you know that? I know, I love you too. Now go make whatever decision you're going to make, but make it for the right reasons. And Dad, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you for standing up to that captain. That took guts. Thanks, sweetheart. I'll see you tonight. Bring pizza, the good kind from Antonio's, not that chain garbage. Ryan ended the call and stood there for another moment, then walked back into the building. He had a decision to make, but first he needed more information. He needed to understand exactly what the board was asking him to do and what it would actually mean for the company. The CEO's office was on the 3rd floor of the administrative building, a space that managed to be both impressive and understated in the way that suggested careful attention to corporate image. Ryan had been here once before, 8 months ago, when he'd signed the employment paperwork that made him just another first officer on the flight roster. The CEO then had been Richard Pearson, a former Navy pilot who'd built Coastal from a struggling regional carrier into a mid-tier operation with ambitions of competing with the major airlines. Richard's assistant looked up when Ryan entered the waiting area. Mr. Cole, Mr. Pearson is expecting you. Go right in. Richard stood when Ryan entered, extending his hand across a desk covered with charts and financial reports. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired and lean, with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Ryan, thank you for coming up. I know Brennan gave you the offer letter, but I wanted to talk to you directly about what we're proposing and why. Ryan shook his hand and took the offered seat. I appreciate that. I have questions. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, but first, let me say something that needs to be said. What you did on that tarmac took courage, real courage, not the kind that comes from training or procedure, but the kind that comes from character. You had every reason to keep your head down, make that flight, and avoid conflict. Instead, you put safety first, even though you knew it would cost you. That's exactly the kind of leadership this company needs. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing what your job required even when your captain told you not to. There's a difference, and that difference is why we need you in this role. Richard pulled out a tablet and brought up a presentation. Let me show you what's been happening at Coastal over the past 3 years. These are our safety incident reports. Things like maintenance deferrals, near misses, crew conflicts, passenger complaints related to operational decisions. Notice anything? Ryan studied the graphs. They're trending upward, significantly upward. We've had a 37% increase in reportable safety events in 3 years. None of them catastrophic, thank God, but all of them concerning. And when we dig into the details, we find a pattern. Captains making decisions that prioritize schedule over safety. Co-pilots who are afraid to speak up. Maintenance concerns that get deferred or dismissed. A culture that's slowly eroding from the inside. And you think one person in a safety operations role can change that? I think one person with the right authority and the right approach can catalyze change across the entire organization. But it has to be someone who understands the operational reality, who has credibility with flight crews, and who isn't afraid to challenge authority when necessary. That's you, Ryan. Richard closed the tablet and looked at Ryan directly. Here's what I'm offering. Director of Safety Operations with full authority to review, modify, and implement safety protocols across all operational divisions. You'll have a staff of 6, including safety analysts, training coordinators, and compliance officers. You'll report directly to me and have budget authority for any initiatives you deem necessary. You'll also have a seat at the executive table when we make decisions about fleet expansion, route planning, or any operational changes that impact safety. And my ownership stake? Remains exactly as it is. 10% equity, full voting rights, board participation. This isn't about your ownership. This is about your competence and your demonstrated commitment to doing things right. Ryan absorbed this. What about Captain Ward? Richard's expression hardened slightly. Captain Ward's employment with Coastal Airways will be terminated effective end of this week. The investigation found multiple violations of company policy, federal regulations, and basic standards of crew resource management. Her lawyer is negotiating the terms of separation, but the outcome isn't in question. She's done here. And the other captains who've been operating the same way? That's where you come in. We need a comprehensive review of cockpit culture, crew dynamics, and safety reporting mechanisms. We need training programs that emphasize collaboration over hierarchy. We need systems that make it easy and safe for any crew member to report concerns without fear of retaliation. We need to rebuild trust in our safety infrastructure from the ground up. That's a massive undertaking. It is, which is why it needs someone who understands what's at stake. Someone who's been in the cockpit when things went wrong. Someone who's had to make hard choices under pressure. Someone who knows the difference between procedure and reality. Ryan thought about Maya's question. What did he actually want to do? He wanted to fly. He wanted the simplicity of checklists and protocols, the clarity of mechanical systems, the satisfaction of taking an aircraft from point A to point B safely and professionally. He didn't want meetings and politics and the grinding work of organizational change. But he also thought about Jennifer and the other flight attendants who'd sent messages of support. About the co-pilots who'd flown with Lena Ward and been too intimidated to speak up. About the passengers who boarded aircraft every day trusting that the people in the cockpit would put their safety above everything else. If I take this position, I need complete autonomy in how I approach it, Ryan said slowly. No interference from the board, No pressure to soften findings or recommendations because they might be uncomfortable for senior personnel. If I find problems, I report them honestly and we fix them. Period. Agreed. I need the authority to ground aircraft, suspend pilots, or halt operations if I determine there's a safety risk. Not subject to review or appeal. Immediate authority. Richard hesitated slightly. That's a significant amount of power, Ryan. It's the same authority every pilot in command has when they're responsible for an aircraft. I'm just extending it across the entire fleet. If you don't trust my judgment on that, then you shouldn't trust me in this role. Fair point. Agreed. And I need protection for whistleblowers. Anyone who reports a safety concern gets full immunity from retaliation, full confidentiality if they request it, and full support from my office in documenting and investigating their concerns. Non-negotiable. That could create some challenging situations with senior captains who feel their authority is being undermined. Their authority should be undermined if they're making unsafe decisions. That's exactly the culture we need to change. Richard smiled slightly. You're already thinking like a safety director. All right, you have my commitment on all those terms. What else? I want to keep flying, not full-time, but enough to stay current, stay connected to the operational reality, and maintain my credibility with flight crews. I'm not going to be an administrator who's forgotten what it's like in the cockpit. How much flying are we talking about? 1 or 2 trips a month. As a line pilot, not as management checking up on people. Just another co-pilot doing the job. Richard considered this. That's unusual, but I can see the value. It keeps you grounded in the operational experience. Agreed. Anything else? Ryan thought about Maya, about the promise he'd made to himself when he took this job, about the kind of father and pilot he wanted to be. I need flexibility for family responsibilities. My daughter is 12. She needs me present and available, not buried in work 70 hours a week. If this role requires that kind of commitment, I can't accept it. Family comes first. I've got 3 kids of my own, Ryan. I understand. We'll structure the role to be manageable. Will that work? Ryan looked down at the folder he'd been carrying, then back up at Richard. Give me until tomorrow. I need to sleep on this and talk it through with my daughter. She's got strong opinions about decisions that affect our lives. She sounds like a smart kid. She is. Too smart sometimes. Tomorrow works. But Ryan, I want you to understand something. This isn't just about fixing what went wrong with Lena Ward. This is about positioning Coastal to grow safely and sustainably over the next decade. The decisions you make in this role will shape this company's future. That's the opportunity here, to build something that lasts. Ryan stood and shook Richard's hand. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. That evening, Ryan and Maya sat at their small kitchen table eating pizza from Antonio's and talking about the future. Ryan had laid out everything, the job offer, the scope of responsibility, the challenges ahead, the choice between flying and administration. Maya listened carefully, asking questions that were far more insightful than most adults would have managed. She wanted to know about the time commitment, the stress level, whether he'd still be able to make it to her school events and weekend hikes. She wanted to understand what success would look like in this role and what failure might mean. Here's my question, she said finally, wiping pizza grease from her fingers. If you don't take this job, will someone else do it just as well? Ryan considered that. Probably not. The board chose me specifically because of what happened with Ward and because of my operational experience. Someone else might do it competently, but they wouldn't have the same credibility or the same understanding of what needs to change. So if you say no, the changes might not happen at all. They might happen eventually, but maybe not soon enough. Maybe not before another co-pilot faces the same situation I did and makes a different choice. Maya nodded slowly. And if you take the job, will you be good at it? I think so. I know what needs to be fixed and I'm not afraid to do the work. But I'll miss flying as my primary job. But you'd still fly sometimes. Mr. Pearson agreed to let me maintain currency with regular trips. Not as much as now, but enough. Then I think you should do it. Maya's voice was matter-of-fact, as if the decision was obvious. Not because you have to, or because you feel guilty, but because you're actually the right person for it. You know what it's like to be the co-pilot who sees something wrong. You know what it's like to be afraid to speak up. You know what it's like when authority gets used as a weapon instead of a responsibility. Someone who hasn't lived that can't fix it the same way you can. Ryan felt something loosen in his chest. You're sure? I'm sure. And Dad, I'm proud of you for even having to make this choice. Most people never get the chance to do something that actually matters. You do. So do it. The next morning, Ryan returned to Richard Pearson's office and accepted the position. The announcement went out company-wide that afternoon, a carefully worded statement that introduced Ryan Cole as the new Director of Safety Operations, emphasized his operational background and commitment to safety culture, and outlined the ambitious scope of his mandate. Buried in the third paragraph, almost as an afterthought, was the mention that Mr. Cole was also a minority stakeholder in coastal airways. The response was immediate and varied. Some pilots sent congratulatory messages, thanking him for standing up to Ward and expressing hope that things would change. Others sent hostile notes accusing him of leveraging his ownership stake to destroy a veteran captain's career. The flight attendant union released a statement of support. The pilots' union remained carefully neutral while requesting a meeting to discuss how the new safety initiatives would be implemented. The media picked up the story within 24 hours. The narrative practically wrote itself. Co-owner of airline refused by captain, report safety issue, captain terminated, owner takes safety role. Aviation blogs and industry publications ran analyses of what it meant for cockpit authority and crew resource management. Consumer advocacy groups praised Coastal for prioritizing safety. Competitors quietly worried about the precedent being set. Ryan ignored most of it. He had work to do. His first week in the new role was a masterclass in organizational dysfunction. He spent days reviewing safety reports, interviewing crew members, analyzing flight data, and documenting patterns that had been hiding in plain sight for years. What he found was both worse and more systemic than he'd expected. The problems went far beyond Lena Ward. There were captains who routinely pressured co-pilots to defer maintenance issues until after flights. There were dispatchers who prioritized schedule adherence over weather safety margins. There were mechanics who signed off on inspections they hadn't personally conducted because they were behind schedule and facing pressure from operations management. There were flight attendants who'd reported safety concerns and been told to stop being dramatic. The culture wasn't broken in one place. It was fractured throughout the entire organization. Ryan's second week, he called his first all-hands meeting with flight operations. Every pilot, every dispatcher, every operations supervisor. The conference center was packed, the atmosphere tense with uncertainty and resistance. Ryan stood at the front of the room and looked out at faces he'd flown with, faces he'd passed in hallways, faces that regarded him with everything from hope to hostility. "My name is Ryan Cole," he began, his voice calm and clear. "Some of you know me as a co-pilot. Some of you know me as the guy who got Lena Ward fired. Some of you know me as a co-owner of this company. All of those things are true, but none of them are why I'm standing here today." He clicked to the first slide of his presentation, a photograph of Flight 447 on the tarmac, the starboard wing clearly visible. "I'm here because on January 11th, I found a hydraulic leak during a pre-flight inspection. I reported it to my captain. She dismissed it. I reported it to operations. She called me insubordinate. I documented everything and stood my ground. And because I did that, 147 people didn't get on an aircraft with a compromised hydraulic system." He let that sink in for a moment. "But here's what keeps me up at night. I almost didn't make that call. I stood there on that tarmac, my phone in my hand, knowing that if I reported that leak, I would probably lose my job. Knowing that my captain would make my life hell. Knowing that I'd be labeled a troublemaker and blackballed from future assignments. I came very close to just getting in that cockpit and making the flight. Very close." The room was silent now, every eye on him. "I didn't stay quiet because I had ownership in this company to protect me. I didn't know if that would matter. I didn't stay quiet because I was brave or principled or special. I stayed quiet because I got lucky. Lucky that I had enough experience to trust my judgment. Lucky that I had enough savings to risk unemployment. Lucky that I had a daughter at home who I knew would ask me if I did the right thing. A lot of you don't have that luck. A lot of you are living paycheck to paycheck, hoping to upgrade to captain someday, afraid that one wrong move will end your career, and that fear is killing our safety culture." He advanced to the next slide. Statistics showing the increase in safety incidents over 3 years. This is what fear looks like in data form. More deferred maintenance, more weather-related near misses, more crew conflicts, more passengers complaining about feeling unsafe. We're trending in exactly the wrong direction, and it's because we've created an environment where people are afraid to speak up. A hand went up in the middle of the room. Ryan nodded to the pilot, a senior captain named Williams. With all due respect, Mr. Cole, you're making it sound like we're all complicit in creating an unsafe operation. Some of us have been flying safely for decades without these problems you're describing. You're right, Captain Williams. Many of you have exemplary records. But safety culture isn't about individual perfection. It's about systemic resilience. It's about building structures that catch problems before they become catastrophes. And our structures are failing. Another hand. So what are you proposing? More paperwork, more bureaucracy, more second-guessing of pilot judgment? I'm proposing something radical, Ryan said. I'm proposing that we trust each other. I'm proposing that when a co-pilot says they saw something concerning, we investigate it rather than dismiss it. I'm proposing that when a mechanic says they need more time to complete an inspection, we give them that time rather than pressure them to sign off. I'm proposing that when a flight attendant reports a safety issue, we take it seriously rather than telling them they're overreacting. He advanced to a new slide, a draft of the new safety reporting system. Here's how it's going to work. Anyone in this company, from the newest hire to the CEO, can report a safety concern anonymously through a protected channel that comes directly to my office. Every report gets investigated within 24 hours. Every finding gets documented and tracked. Every resolution gets reported back to the person who made the initial complaint. And anyone who retaliates against someone for making a safety report gets terminated immediately. No warnings, no second chances. Gone. The room erupted in murmurs. Ryan waited for them to settle. I know some of you think this undermines pilot authority. You're wrong. Real authority comes from competence and trust, not from rank and intimidation. The best captains I've ever flown with were the ones who listened to their co-pilots, who valued input from their entire crew, who understood that safety is a team effort. Those are the captains who will thrive under this new system. He looked directly at several senior captains in the front rows. The captains who will struggle are the ones who think their experience means they can't be wrong. The ones who treat co-pilots like subordinates rather than colleagues. The ones who prioritize schedule over safety and ego over procedure. Those captains are going to find themselves under scrutiny, and if they can't adapt, they're going to find themselves looking for work elsewhere. Captain Williams stood up, his face red. You're talking about destroying careers based on subjective complaints from junior crew members who don't have the experience to evaluate complex situations. I'm talking about holding everyone to the same standard, safety, first, always. If that destroys careers, those were careers that needed destroying. Williams started to respond, but another captain, a woman named Foster, who Ryan had flown with once, cut him off. Captain Williams, sit down. Mr. Cole is right, and you know it. We've all flown with captains who made us uncomfortable. We've all seen things get dismissed that shouldn't have been. Maybe it's time we admitted that seniority doesn't equal infallibility. Williams sat down, but his expression made it clear the argument wasn't over. Ryan spent another hour outlining the specific changes, new training protocols that emphasized crew resource management, mandatory safety refreshers every 6 months, peer review systems for complex decisions, transparent investigation processes, and protection for whistleblowers. By the time he finished, half the room looked energized and half looked ready to mutiny. That afternoon, he started receiving resignation letters. 3 senior captains quit within hours, claiming they wouldn't work under a system that questioned their judgment. Ryan accepted each resignation without argument and immediately began the process of replacing them with captains who understood that safety culture mattered more than ego. He also started receiving messages of support, co-pilots thanking him for saying what they'd been thinking for years, flight attendants sharing stories of times they'd felt unsafe but been too afraid to report it, mechanics describing pressure they'd faced to cut corners, dispatchers admitting they'd been prioritizing schedule over weather margins because that's what operations demanded. The dysfunction was even deeper than the data suggested. But now, finally, people were talking about it. Ryan's 3rd week, he launched the new safety reporting system and received 47 reports in the first 72 hours. Most were minor documentation errors, communication gaps, training deficiencies. But 3 were serious enough to require immediate action. 1 aircraft was grounded for unscheduled inspection. 1 captain was suspended pending investigation of allegations that he'd flown fatigued. 1 dispatcher was reassigned after multiple reports that he'd pressured crews to accept marginal weather clearances. The pilots' union filed a grievance. The operations VP complained to the CEO that Ryan was disrupting normal business. 2 board members expressed concern that the safety initiatives were costing too much and impacting too many personnel. Richard Pearson backed Ryan completely. "This is exactly what we hired you to do," Richard told him during their weekly check-in. "Disrupt normal business, challenge the status quo, make people uncomfortable. Change doesn't happen when everyone's happy. It happens when someone forces the issue. I'm making enemies. You're making change. The enemies come with the territory, but Ryan, you need to understand something. You've got maybe 6 months of political capital to spend here. After that, if we don't see measurable improvements in our safety metrics, the board is going to start questioning whether this approach is working. So use this window wisely. Make the changes that matter most. Build the systems that will last. Because once the novelty wears off and people start calculating the cost, you're going to face resistance you can't overcome with just authority." Ryan knew Richard was right. He worked 16-hour days building training programs, interviewing pilots, reviewing procedures, documenting problems, and implementing solutions. He barely saw Maya except for late dinners and weekend mornings. His 1 or 2 monthly flights became his only respite, the only time he could just be a pilot again instead of the person trying to fix everything. On one of those flights, paired with a young first officer named Chen, no relation to the previous Chen who'd flown with Ward, Ryan experienced exactly what he'd been trying to create. During cruise, Chen pointed out an unusual vibration in the number 2 engine that was within parameters but felt wrong to him. "Captain, I know the gauges are green, but something doesn't feel right. The frequency of that vibration is different than normal." Ryan, sitting in the left seat for this trip, listened carefully to what Chen was describing. "You're right. It's subtle, but it's there. What do you recommend?" "I'd like to have maintenance check it when we land. Document it in the log. Make sure it gets looked at before the next flight." "Good call. Note it in the log and I'll add my observation. Even if it turns out to be nothing, better to check than assume." Chen looked relieved. "Thank you, Captain. I wasn't sure if I should mention it since everything's technically within limits." "Always mention it. Always. That's exactly the kind of observation that prevents problems from becoming emergencies. You did good work today." After they landed and the maintenance crew confirmed that the vibration was an early indicator of a bearing issue that would have worsened significantly within another few flights, Ryan made sure Chen's observation was highlighted in the safety report and commended in his personnel file. Word spread quickly among the co-pilots. The new safety director meant what he said about valuing input from all crew members. By the end of his 3rd month, Ryan had built something that was starting to resemble the culture he'd envisioned. Safety reports were flowing steadily, but without overwhelming the system. Investigations were being conducted fairly and transparently. Training programs were emphasizing collaboration over hierarchy. And most importantly, crews were talking to each other honestly about concerns instead of staying silent out of fear. The metrics were starting to shift too. Safety incidents were trending downward. Maintenance deferrals were decreasing. Crew satisfaction scores were improving. The system was working. But Ryan also knew that success created its own challenges. The captains who'd resigned were talking to other airlines, spreading their version of events, painting Coastal as a company where management didn't trust its experienced pilots. The pilots' union was circulating concerns about the new reporting system being used for witch hunts. And Lena Ward, now unemployed and bitter, had hired a public relations firm and was giving interviews to aviation publications about how she'd been unfairly scapegoated. The battle wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. The interview appeared in Aviation Weekly on a Thursday morning, and by noon Ryan's phone was ringing non-stop. Lena Ward had given them everything. Her version of the hydraulic leak incident, her claims of being targeted by a vindictive co-owner, her allegations that Coastal Airways had sacrificed an experienced captain to protect management from liability. The article was titled, "When Ownership Trumps Experience, the Dangerous New Trend in Aviation Safety," and it painted Ryan as exactly the kind of administrator pilots feared most, someone using authority to punish competence and silence dissent. Richard Pearson called an emergency meeting. Ryan sat across from him in the same office where he'd accepted this position 4 months ago, watching the CEO read through the article with an expression that grew darker with each paragraph. "She's smart," Richard said finally, tossing the magazine onto his desk. "She's not attacking the safety improvements directly. She's attacking you personally and framing this as corporate overreach. She's making herself the victim and you the villain. And unfortunately, it's going to resonate with a lot of people who are already uncomfortable with how much power you have." "Everything in that article is either misleading or outright false," Ryan said. "The leak was real. The investigation was thorough. Her termination was based on documented violations, not personal vendetta. I know that, you know that, but public perception doesn't care about facts when the narrative is this compelling. Experienced female captain terminated by male co-owner after single incident? That plays into every concern people have about power dynamics in aviation. So what do you want me to do? Issue a statement? Defend myself publicly? No. That makes it worse. That makes it look like we're fighting with a former employee, which keeps the story alive and gives her more ammunition. We need to let the work speak for itself." The work is speaking for itself. Our safety metrics are improving, incidents are down, crew satisfaction is up. But none of that matters if Ward succeeds in making me radioactive. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ramp where aircraft were being prepped for afternoon departures. "There's something else you need to know. The FAA has opened an inquiry into Coastal's safety practices. It's supposedly routine, part of their regular oversight, but the timing is suspicious. They want to review our incident reports, interview crew members, examine our training protocols. They want to understand how we're implementing these new safety initiatives and whether they're actually effective or just window dressing." Ryan felt something cold settle in his stomach. "When does this start?" "Next week. They'll be here for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. They'll have access to everything: flight records, maintenance logs, personnel files, investigation reports, including the full report on Lena Ward. That report vindicates everything I did. It also shows that we had a captain operating unsafely for years, and nobody stopped her until you came along. It raises questions about our oversight systems, our training programs, our entire safety culture before you arrived. The FAA could decide that the problems run deeper than one captain and impose sanctions or restrictions on our operations. Or they could see that we identified problems and fixed them, which is exactly what we're supposed to do. Let's hope they see it that way. But Ryan, you need to understand what's at stake here. If the FAA determines our safety culture was fundamentally compromised, they could ground our fleet, revoke our operating certificate, or impose fines that would bankrupt this company. Everything you've built, everything we're trying to accomplish, it could all disappear because Lena Ward decided to burn us down on her way out. Ryan thought about the 47 safety reports from his first week, about the captains who'd resigned rather than adapt, about the years of problems that had been accumulating while everyone looked the other way. Then we show them the truth. We show them what was broken and how we're fixing it. We show them that we're not hiding from problems. We're confronting them. That's a risk. It means admitting we had systemic failures. We did have systemic failures. Pretending otherwise is exactly the kind of thinking that created this mess in the first place. Richard looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, we do it your way. Full transparency, complete cooperation, let the facts speak for themselves. But Ryan, if this goes wrong, if the FAA decides to make an example of us, this company might not survive. Are you prepared for that possibility? I'm prepared to do the right thing and live with the consequences. That's all I've ever been prepared to do. The FAA team arrived the following Monday. 3 investigators led by a senior examiner named Patricia Gomez, who had the kind of reputation that made airline executives nervous. She was thorough, relentless, and completely immune to corporate charm or political pressure. If there were problems to find, she would find them. Ryan met with her team on their first day, providing them with unrestricted access to every system, every report, every piece of documentation they requested. He walked them through the changes he'd implemented, explained the philosophy behind the new safety culture, and answered their questions with complete honesty. "Mr. Cole, I'm going to be direct with you," Gomez said during their initial meeting. "We're here because we received multiple complaints about Coastal's safety practices. Some of those complaints came from former employees, including Captain Ward. Some came from current employees through our confidential reporting system. They paint a picture of an organization that's either covering up problems or creating new ones through overzealous enforcement. Which is it?" "Neither," Ryan said. "We're an organization that had real safety culture problems, identified them, and is working systematically to fix them. Some people are uncomfortable with that process because it challenges the way they've always done things, but discomfort isn't the same as danger. Walk me through the Ward incident, not the sanitized version, the real story." Ryan did, leaving nothing out. The hydraulic leak, Lena's dismissal of his concerns, the pressure to depart on time, the call to operations, the investigation, the findings. He showed Gomez the photographs he'd taken, the maintenance reports, the statements from other co-pilots who'd flown with Ward, the documentation of her pattern of behavior over 3 years. "And you grounded yourself after reporting this?" Gomez asked. "Captain Brennan grounded me pending investigation. Standard procedure." "But you're also a co-owner of this company. You could have overridden that decision." "My ownership doesn't make me exempt from proper procedure. If anything, it means I need to be more careful about following it." Gomez made notes in her tablet. "I'm going to talk to Captain Ward. I'm going to interview every pilot who's filed a complaint about your new systems. I'm going to review every safety report from the past 6 months. And if I find evidence that you've been using your position to settle scores or silence legitimate dissent, I'm going to recommend sanctions that will make your life very difficult. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, and I welcome the scrutiny. If I've made mistakes, I want to know about them so I can fix them." Over the next 2 weeks, Gomez and her team tore through Coastal's operations like a surgical team looking for cancer. They interviewed dozens of crew members, reviewed hundreds of reports, examined training records, and observed daily operations. They flew on several flights as observers, watching how crews interacted and how safety protocols were followed. They sat in on Ryan's weekly safety briefings and reviewed every decision he'd made since taking the director role. Ryan continued his work as if the investigation wasn't happening because stopping would send exactly the wrong message. He processed safety reports, conducted training sessions, investigated new concerns, and made his monthly flights as a line pilot. He refused to let the FAA scrutiny become an excuse to slow down the changes Coastal needed. On a Tuesday afternoon in his 3rd week under FAA review, Ryan received a message from Jennifer, the flight attendant who'd supported him during the Ward incident. She wanted to meet privately to discuss something important. They agreed to coffee at a place near the airport but far enough from Coastal facilities to ensure privacy. Jennifer arrived looking nervous, clutching a folder against her chest like a shield. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure if I should bring this up during the FAA investigation or come to you directly first." "What's going on?" She opened the folder and pulled out printed copies of text messages. "These are from a group chat with about 15 other flight attendants. They've been sharing stories about captains who made them uncomfortable, situations where they felt unsafe but didn't report it, times when they were told to stop complaining. I thought you should see them before the FAA does, because they're planning to submit them as evidence that Coastal's safety culture was worse than we've admitted." Ryan read through the messages, feeling his jaw tighten with each new revelation. Captains who flew while clearly fatigued, maintenance issues dismissed as cosmetic, crew members pressured to work through illness to avoid delays, safety concerns met with mockery or threats. The messages went back 3 years and involved at least a dozen different captains. "Why didn't any of this get reported through official channels?" Ryan asked. "Because we didn't trust the official channels. Before you came, reporting a safety concern felt like putting a target on your back. Captain Ward wasn't the only one who retaliated against crew members who spoke up. She was just the most obvious about it." "And now? Do they trust the system now?" Jennifer hesitated. "Some do. The younger crew members, the ones who've seen how you've handled things. But the veterans are still skeptical. They've been burned too many times to believe that one person can change the whole culture." Ryan looked at the messages again, seeing years of dysfunction distilled into screenshots. "Can I keep these?" That's why I brought them. But Ryan, you need to understand something. If you use these to go after more captains, if you make this bigger than it already is, there are people in this company who will fight back hard. They'll say you're on a witch hunt, that you're destroying careers based on anonymous complaints, that you're making coastal toxic for experienced pilots. It could get ugly. It's already ugly, Jennifer. The question is whether we're going to keep pretending it's not or actually deal with it. I know. That's why I'm giving these to you. Because someone needs to deal with it, and you're the only person who seems willing to try. That evening, Ryan sat at his kitchen table with Maya doing her homework across from him, while he reviewed the text messages Jennifer had provided. Each one was a small horror story of normalized dysfunction, the kind of thing that seemed minor in isolation, but collectively painted a picture of an organization that had lost its way. "You look stressed," Maya observed without looking up from her algebra. "Long day." "You say that every day now. Is the FAA thing still happening?" "Yeah, they're being very thorough." "Are you in trouble?" Ryan looked at his daughter, at her face that was growing more like her mother's every year, at the concern in her eyes that she tried to hide behind casual questions. "I don't think so. But the company might be, which means I might be by extension." "Because of Captain Ward?" "Because of a lot of things that were wrong before I got here. Ward was just the most visible symptom." Maya set down her pencil. "Can I ask you something? And I want a real answer, not a dad answer." "Okay. Do you regret reporting that leak? If you could go back to that morning, knowing everything that's happened since, would you still make the call to operations?" Ryan thought about the question seriously. He thought about the investigation, the job change, the FAA scrutiny, the enemies he'd made, the stress that had become his constant companion. He thought about Lena Ward's interview and the political battles still ahead, and the possibility that all of this might still end badly. "Yes," he said finally, without hesitation, because the alternative was getting in that cockpit knowing something was wrong and hoping it would be fine. And I couldn't do that then, and I can't imagine doing it now. "Even though it's made your life harder? Making the right choice doesn't mean making the easy choice, Maya. Sometimes it means making the choice you can live with." She smiled slightly. "Very dad answer." "You asked for a real answer. That's as real as it gets." The FAA delivered their findings on a Friday afternoon in Richard Pearson's office. Ryan sat with Richard and the company's legal team while Patricia Gomez walked them through 200 pages of detailed analysis, observations, and recommendations. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," Gomez began. "Our investigation found significant evidence of systemic safety culture problems at Coastal Airways prior to January of this year. We found documentation of safety concerns that were dismissed, maintenance issues that were deferred inappropriately, crew members who felt intimidated about reporting problems, and a general pattern of prioritizing operational efficiency over safety margins." Richard's face went pale. The legal team started taking furious notes. "However," Gomez continued, "we also found evidence of immediate and comprehensive corrective action beginning in January. The implementation of the new safety reporting system, the training programs, the leadership changes, and the enforcement actions taken by Director Cole represent exactly the kind of response we want to see when an organization identifies problems. You didn't hide from the issues, you confronted them directly." Ryan felt something unclench in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "Our concern is sustainability," Gomez said. "Mr. Cole has implemented significant changes in a short time frame, but organizational culture change takes years, not months. We need confidence that these improvements will continue and deepen, not revert back to previous patterns once the initial pressure subsides." "What are you recommending?" Richard asked carefully. Gomez pulled out a summary document. "We're issuing a letter of correction rather than a violation or enforcement action. This requires Coastal to submit quarterly reports for the next 2 years documenting safety metrics, training completion rates, and crew satisfaction scores. We'll conduct follow-up inspections at 6-month intervals. If we see sustained improvement, the letter gets closed and you continue operating normally. If we see regression, we'll escalate to formal enforcement proceedings." "That's fair," Ryan said. "We can meet those requirements. You'll need to because Mr. Cole, while we found your actions in the Ward incident to be appropriate and your safety initiatives to be well-designed, we also found evidence that some current employees view your approach as excessive." We interviewed 3 captains who claim you've created an environment of fear where any mistake gets reported and punished. We need to see that you're balancing safety enforcement with reasonable operational flexibility." "Can I see those interviews?" Ryan asked. "They're confidential, but the substance is that some experienced pilots feel micromanaged and second-guessed. They feel that the new reporting system encourages junior crew members to challenge captain authority inappropriately. Or it encourages all crew members to speak up when they see something wrong, which is exactly what it's supposed to do. There's a line, Mr. Cole, between empowering safety reporting and undermining operational effectiveness. You need to make sure you're on the right side of it." After Gomez and her team left, Richard slumped in his chair with visible relief. "Letter of correction. That's about the best outcome we could have hoped for. No fines, no operational restrictions, just monitoring and reporting. We can work with that." "As long as we maintain the improvements," Ryan said. "We will. We have to." But Ryan, Gomez was right about one thing. You've made a lot of changes very quickly, and not everyone is comfortable with them. The 3 captains she mentioned who complained about micromanagement, I know who they are. They're good pilots with solid records who genuinely feel like you're creating an environment where they can't do their jobs effectively. Because their jobs used to include dismissing co-pilot concerns and pressuring crews to cut corners. Maybe. Or maybe they're legitimately concerned that we've overcorrected and now every minor disagreement becomes a safety investigation. You need to find balance, Ryan. You need to show that this isn't about punishing people for honest mistakes, but about preventing dangerous patterns. Ryan thought about Jennifer's text messages, about the years of problems that had been ignored, about the culture that had allowed someone like Lena Ward to intimidate co-pilots for decades. I hear you, but I'm not backing down on the core principle. Safety concerns get taken seriously, always. If some captains can't accept that, maybe they're not the right captains for this company. And if we lose too many experienced captains, we won't have a company left. You see the problem? Ryan saw it. The tension between changing culture and maintaining operations, between enforcing standards and retaining personnel, between fixing what was broken and not breaking what worked. It was the fundamental challenge of organizational change, and there were no easy answers. Over the next 3 months, Ryan worked to find that balance. He continued processing safety reports aggressively, but started implementing a tiered response system that distinguished between systemic problems requiring immediate action and isolated incidents requiring coaching and education. He created peer review boards so that safety decisions weren't just coming from his office, but were vetted by experienced pilots who understood operational reality. He instituted regular town halls where crews could voice concerns about the new systems and suggest improvements. The metrics continued trending positive. Safety incidents declined steadily. Crew satisfaction scores improved. The quarterly report to the FAA showed sustained progress. But Ryan also saw the cost of change in personal terms, the captains who left for other airlines, the relationships that had become strained, the constant tension of trying to transform an organization that wasn't entirely sure it wanted to be transformed. On a Wednesday morning, 6 months after accepting the director role, Ryan was scheduled for one of his regular line flights. He showed up for the crew briefing to find his co-pilot was a young pilot named Marcus Chen, the same first officer who'd spotted the engine vibration months earlier and been commended for it. Ryan smiled when he saw the pairing. "Good to fly with you again, Marcus." "You too, Captain. Looking forward to it." The flight was unremarkable in the best possible way. Smooth departure, cruise at altitude, professional communication, textbook landing. But during the descent, Marcus spoke up about something he'd noticed during cruise that Ryan had missed. "Captain, I saw what looked like a slight asymmetry in our fuel distribution during cruise. The numbers corrected themselves, but I logged it in case maintenance wants to check the fuel management system." Ryan pulled up the logs and reviewed the data. Marcus was right. There'd been a brief imbalance that had self-corrected but might indicate a sensor issue or valve problem. "Good catch. Definitely worth noting. I missed that completely." "You were handling ATC coordination. That's why we have 2 sets of eyes." The simple professionalism of that exchange, the easy collaboration, the mutual respect. This was what Ryan had been trying to build. Not a system where captains were infallible dictators and co-pilots were silent subordinates, but a culture where everyone was responsible for safety and empowered to speak up without fear. After landing, while they were conducting post-flight procedures, Marcus said something that stayed with Ryan for days afterward. Captain Cole, Director Cole, I wanted to thank you for what you've done here. Before you arrived, I was seriously considering leaving aviation. I'd flown with 3 different captains who made me feel like my job was to sit quietly and do what I was told. It was making me question whether this career was right for me. But now, with the new culture you've built, I actually enjoy coming to work. I feel valued, so thank you. Ryan looked at this young pilot who represented everything he'd been fighting for: competence, professionalism, courage to speak up, commitment to safety. You don't need to thank me, Marcus. You're doing exactly what you should be doing. The system should have always supported that. The fact that it didn't was the problem I was trying to fix. Well, it's fixed now, and a lot of us appreciate it, even if not everyone says so. That night, Ryan came home to find Maya waiting up for him, even though it was past her bedtime. She had her laptop open and was working on something that looked like a presentation. What are you still doing up? Career Day project. We have to interview someone about their job and present to the class. I picked you. Ryan sat down next to her and looked at the slides she'd created. They outlined his career progression, the Ward incident, the changes he'd implemented at Coastal, the FAA investigation, the results achieved. It was thorough, well-researched, and made him sound far more heroic than he felt. This is impressive work, honey, but you might want to tone down some of the dramatic language. I didn't exactly save the airline single-handedly. But you kind of did. You found a problem everyone else was ignoring and you fixed it, even though it was hard and people fought you. That's important. What made you pick me for this project? You could have chosen someone with a more exciting job. Maya looked at him with that serious expression that made her seem far older than 12. Because I wanted to show people what doing the right thing actually looks like. Not the movie version where the hero saves everyone and gets applause. The real version where you do what needs to be done and some people hate you for it and it's messy and hard, but you do it anyway because it matters. Ryan felt his throat tighten. When did you get so wise? I told you, I have an excellent teacher. The following week, Ryan presented Coastal's second quarterly report to the FAA. The data was compelling. Safety incidents down 43% from the previous year, maintenance deferrals reduced by 60%, crew satisfaction scores up across all categories, training completion rates at 98%. Patricia Gomez reviewed the report with her characteristic thoroughness before delivering her assessment. This is good work, Mr. Cole. The metrics show sustained improvement, not just initial reaction to scrutiny. The crew interviews we conducted showed genuine cultural shift, not superficial compliance. You're building something that looks like it might actually last. Thank you. We're trying. Keep trying. Because the real test isn't the first year when everyone's paying attention. It's year 3, year 5, when the initial urgency fades and people start to think maybe we can relax standards a little. That's when organizations backslide. Don't let that happen here. I won't. I believe you, which is why I'm recommending we close the letter of correction early. You've demonstrated sustained improvement beyond what we required. As far as the FAA is concerned, Coastal Airways has successfully addressed the safety culture issues we identified. Congratulations. After Gomez left, Ryan sat in his office and felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. A sense of accomplishment. Not completion, because the work would never truly be complete, but accomplishment. He'd taken a broken system and fixed it. He'd built structures that would protect people long after he was gone. He'd proven that one person willing to stand up for what's right could actually change things. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard Pearson. FAA called. They're closing the letter. You did it. Drinks on me tonight. Ryan typed back, can't tonight. Promised Maya I'd help with her science project. But thank you for backing me through all of this. Richard's response came quickly. You earned it. And Ryan, I'm glad you reported that leak. I'm glad you took this job. And I'm glad you didn't quit when things got hard. This company is better because of you. Ryan stood and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the same tarmac where 6 months ago he'd stood under a Boeing 737 and made the choice that changed everything. Aircraft were moving in their practice patterns. Crews were conducting pre-flight inspections. The whole complex machinery of commercial aviation was humming along safely and professionally. Somewhere out there, a co-pilot was probably spotting something their captain missed. Somewhere, a mechanic was taking extra time to verify an inspection rather than rushing to meet schedule. Somewhere, a flight attendant was reporting a concern without fear of retaliation. The systems he'd built were working, protecting people he would never meet, preventing problems he would never know about. That evening, Ryan arrived home to find Maya had set up the dining table with her science project materials spread everywhere. They worked together for 2 hours, building a model of the solar system while discussing orbital mechanics and gravitational forces. It was simple, domestic, completely ordinary in the best possible way. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Maya said while carefully gluing Saturn's rings in place. "Always." "Do you miss just being a pilot? Before all the director stuff when you could just show up, fly the plane, and go home?" Ryan considered the question honestly. "Sometimes there was a simplicity to it that I enjoyed. But Maya, I realized something over these past months. Being just a pilot was never really an option for me once I saw how broken things were. I could have stayed quiet, flown my trips, collected my paycheck, but I would have known that other people were facing the same situations I faced with Captain Ward, and I would have known I had the ability to help them and chose not to. That would have eaten at me every single day." "So you're happier now, even though it's harder?" "I'm more satisfied now. Happier is complicated, but satisfied that I'm doing work that matters? Absolutely." Maya nodded slowly, adding another planet to the model. "I get that. It's like when I see someone getting bullied at school. I could just walk past and avoid the drama, but then I'd feel terrible about myself. So I say something, even though it's uncomfortable, and sometimes kids get mad at me for it, but at least I can live with myself." Ryan looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've been standing up to bullies at school?" "Sometimes, when it's important. You taught me that, you know. That standing up for what's right matters more than being popular or comfortable." "I also want you to be safe, Maya." "I know. I'm careful. But Dad, if you can stand up to airplane captains and company politics and federal investigators, I can handle middle school drama. We're both just doing what we think is right." That night, after Maya went to bed, Ryan sat in his small home office and drafted an email he'd been thinking about for weeks. It went to every pilot, every flight attendant, every mechanic, every dispatcher at Coastal Airways. The subject line read, "6 months in, thank you, and what's next?" The body of the email was simple and direct. He thanked the crews who'd embraced the new safety culture. He acknowledged the difficulty of change and the discomfort it had caused. He shared the FAA's decision to close the letter of correction early and what that meant for the company's future. He committed to continuing the work of building and maintaining a culture where safety was truly first, always. And at the end, he included a story. Not about himself, but about Marcus Chen and the fuel distribution asymmetry he'd spotted. About a young co-pilot who felt empowered to speak up about something subtle because he trusted the system would take him seriously. That, Ryan wrote, was what success looked like. Not perfect operations, but crews working together professionally to catch problems before they became crises. He sent the email at midnight and went to bed feeling more settled than he had in months. The responses started arriving the next morning. Dozens of them, from pilots and crew members across the company. Some thanked him for the changes. Some shared their own stories of times they'd spoken up and been heard. Some admitted they'd been skeptical at first but were seeing the value now. A few were still critical, arguing that the new systems were excessive or that he'd gone too far. Ryan read all of them, responding personally to as many as he could. One email came from an unexpected source. Captain Foster, the woman who'd defended him during that contentious all-hands meeting months ago. She wrote, "Director Cole, I wanted you to know that I'm retiring next month after 32 years of flying. I could have retired 5 years ago, but I stayed because I still loved the job. Then things started changing, the culture started shifting, and I fell out of love with it. I was going to leave last year, before you arrived. But then you started fixing things, and I remembered why I loved this work in the first place. So thank you for giving me back that last year of genuinely enjoying what I do. You made a difference." Ryan read that email 3 times before responding. It was easy to measure success in metrics and statistics. in incident reports and satisfaction scores. It was harder, but more meaningful to measure it in individual lives changed, in careers salvaged, in the quiet satisfaction of people who could come to work and feel valued and safe. 2 weeks later, Ryan was called to Richard Pearson's office for what was described as an important meeting. When he arrived, he found not just Richard, but the entire board of directors present via video conference. His stomach tightened with apprehension. This felt like the setup for either very good news or very bad news, and he couldn't predict which. "Ryan, thank you for coming," Richard began. "The board wanted to speak with you directly about the future of your role here at Coastal." Here it comes, Ryan thought. Either they're promoting me or they've decided my approach is too disruptive and they want me to step back. The board chairman, a former airline CEO named Douglas Hart, spoke from the video screen. "Mr. Cole, we've reviewed the comprehensive reports on the safety culture changes you've implemented, the FAA's early closure of their letter of correction, and the sustained improvements in our operational metrics. We've also noted that these changes were accomplished while maintaining operational efficiency and actually improving crew retention rates." Ryan nodded, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "We'd like to offer you a permanent position on the executive team as Vice President of Safety and Training, with expanded authority to implement these programs across all of Coastal's operations, including our freight division and our maintenance facilities. We believe the model you've built needs to extend beyond flight operations to encompass our entire safety culture systematically." Ryan blinked. "That's a significant expansion of responsibility." "It is, but you've proven you can handle it. More importantly, you've proven you'll do it with integrity and courage, even when it's politically difficult. Those are the qualities we need in senior leadership. I appreciate the confidence, but I need to maintain my currency as a line pilot. That's non-negotiable." Douglas smiled slightly. "We expected you'd say that. We're fine with it. 2 trips per month, your choice of routes, as long as it doesn't conflict with critical executive responsibilities. Does that work?" Ryan thought about Maya, about work-life balance, about the promise he'd made to himself that family came first. "It works if I have genuine flexibility for family responsibilities, and if we structure the role so I'm not working 70-hour weeks indefinitely. We can structure it that way. You'll have a strong team supporting you. The goal is sustainability, not burnout." Ryan looked at Richard, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Then I accept. Thank you." "Thank them." After the board meeting concluded, Richard walked Ryan to the elevator. "You've earned this, Ryan, not because you're an owner, but because you've proven yourself as a leader. The board sees that, the crews see it. Even the people who were skeptical at first are coming around. There are still captains who think I destroyed Lena Ward unfairly. There always will be. You can't please everyone and you shouldn't try. What matters is that you did the right thing and built systems to prevent it from happening again. That's leadership." The elevator doors opened and Ryan stepped in. As they closed, Richard called out, "Oh, and Ryan, your daughter is welcome at the company picnic next month. The executive team brings their families. She should meet the people whose lives you've made safer." Ryan smiled. "She'd like that." That night, he told Maya about the promotion. She listened with her characteristic seriousness, asking questions about what it would mean for his schedule, whether he'd still be home for dinners, whether he'd still help with homework and weekend hikes. "I'll still be your dad first and an executive second," Ryan promised. "That doesn't change." "Good. Because I need you to explain calculus to me next year, and I'm pretty sure vice presidents of safety and training are required to help their daughters with math homework. It's probably in the job description." "Definitely in the job description. Right there in the fine print." Maya smiled, then grew serious again. "I'm proud of you, Dad. Not just for the promotion, but for everything. For finding that leak, for standing up to Captain Ward, for making the company better even when it was hard. You showed me that doing the right thing actually matters, even when people tell you it doesn't." Ryan felt his eyes sting slightly. "You showed me the same thing, Maya, every day. By being brave enough to stand up to bullies, by working hard on things that matter, by asking the questions that need to be asked. We're teaching each other." "Good team," Maya said. "The best team," Ryan agreed. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Ryan stood in front of the first class of Coastal Airways' new pilot training program, a comprehensive course that emphasized safety culture, crew resource management, and the courage to speak up when something felt wrong. The students were a mix of experienced pilots transitioning to coastal and new hires just beginning their commercial careers. Among them was a young woman named Sarah Martinez, niece of the first officer Ryan had temporarily replaced, the one who'd requested transfer away from Lena Ward. "My name is Ryan Cole," he began, standing at the front of the training center classroom. "Some of you know me as the VP of Safety and Training. Some know me as the guy who reported the hydraulic leak. Some know me as a co-owner of this company. But today, I'm here as a pilot talking to other pilots about what really matters in this job." He clicked to the first slide of his presentation, a photograph of Flight 447 on the tarmac, the same image he'd shown at that contentious all-hands meeting months ago. This is where it started for me. Standing under this wing, looking at hydraulic fluid dripping from a fitting, knowing that reporting it would probably cost me my career. I was terrified. Not of the leak. That was a mechanical problem with a mechanical solution. I was terrified of the human consequences, of disappointing my captain, of being labeled a troublemaker, of losing the job I needed to support my daughter. He looked around the room at faces that were paying complete attention. But I made the call anyway. And yes, it cost me in some ways. It ended my relationship with that captain. It forced me out of the comfortable anonymity of just being another co-pilot. It put me in a position where I had to fight to change a culture that a lot of people didn't want to see changed. But it also saved lives. It prevented an accident that could have killed 147 people. And it led to changes that are making this entire company safer every single day. He advanced to the next slide, statistics showing the improvement in safety metrics over the past 9 months. This is what courage looks like in data form. Incidents down, maintenance deferrals down, crew satisfaction up, safety reports up because people finally trust that reporting problems won't destroy their careers. This is what happens when an organization decides that safety actually comes first, not just in mission statements, but in daily practice. A hand went up. Ryan nodded to the pilot, a man in his 30s who looked skeptical. "Mr. Cole, with respect, you had the protection of being a co-owner. Most of us don't have that. If we challenge a captain the way you did, we're just unemployed co-pilots. How is your experience relevant to those of us who don't have ownership stakes to protect us?" It was a fair question, and Ryan had been expecting it. "You're right that I had some protection, though I didn't know if it would matter when I made that call. But here's what I've learned since then. The protection you need doesn't come from ownership. It comes from systems, from policies that make reporting safe, from leadership that backs up safety decisions, from a culture that values speaking up more than it values avoiding conflict." He pulled up another slide showing the new reporting system and the protections built into it. At Coastal now, you have those systems. You have policies that protect whistleblowers. You have multiple channels for reporting concerns. You have leadership, including me, that will back you up when you make safety-first decisions, even if they're unpopular or expensive. You have a culture that's being deliberately built to support exactly the kind of courage that used to be punished. The skeptical pilot wasn't satisfied. "But what if we end up at another airline? What if we take jobs at places that don't have these systems? Are we just supposed to keep quiet and hope for the best?" Ryan paused, considering his answer carefully. "No. You're supposed to be the person who builds these systems wherever you go. You're supposed to be the captain who listens to co-pilot concerns. You're supposed to be the pilot who speaks up when something feels wrong. You're supposed to be the leader who creates the culture you want to work in, regardless of what the existing culture looks like. That's what this training is really about. Not just teaching you coastal systems, but teaching you how to be the kind of pilot who makes every organization safer." He looked around the room again, meeting eyes, gauging reactions. Some students were nodding. Some still looked skeptical. That was fine. Culture change took time, and not everyone would embrace it immediately. "Let me tell you what success looks like in this career," Ryan continued. "It's not logging the most hours or upgrading to captain the fastest or flying the biggest aircraft. Success is going home every night knowing that you did your job with integrity. Success is looking your family in the eye and telling them you made good decisions. Success is knowing that the people who trusted you with their lives were right to do so. Everything else is just resume padding." He spent the next hour walking them through specific scenarios: what to do when a captain dismisses a concern, how to document safety observations, when to escalate to operations, how to balance professional courtesy with safety responsibility. He shared stories from his own experience, both before and after the ward incident, giving them practical frameworks for handling difficult situations. At the end of the session, Sarah Martinez approached him with a question. "Mr. Cole, my uncle told me about what happened with Captain Ward. He said he tried to report concerns about her flying, but nobody took him seriously until you came along. I wanted to thank you for that, for making it so people like my uncle can do their jobs without being afraid." Ryan looked at this young pilot just starting her career, full of enthusiasm and idealism and hope. Your uncle was brave to speak up even when the system didn't support him. Make sure you thank him for that, and then carry that courage forward in your own career. Be the kind of pilot who speaks up. Be the kind of captain who listens. Build the culture we need, one flight at a time. I will. I promise. After the training session ended, Ryan made his way to the Flight Operations Center. He was scheduled for a trip to Seattle that afternoon, one of his regular currency flights. His co-pilot was listed as First Officer James Chen, Marcus's older brother, he discovered when they met for the pre-flight briefing. "Small world," James said with a smile. "My brother won't shut up about that engine vibration catch in your commendation. I'm curious to see if you're as good as he says, or if he's just starstruck." "Probably a little of both. He's a good pilot, your brother. You should be proud." "I am, and between you and me, I'm glad you're here. I flew with some captains before you arrived who made this job miserable. Now I actually look forward to coming to work, so thank you for that." The flight to Seattle was smooth and professional, the kind of routine trip that was only possible because thousands of small decisions had been made correctly and hundreds of systems were functioning properly. During cruise, Ryan and James talked about their families, their career paths, their hopes for where aviation was heading. It was the kind of easy conversation that good crews had, the collaboration and mutual respect that made cockpits safe and efficient. On approach into Seattle, James spoke up about something he'd noticed. "Captain, I'm seeing some unusual wind shear indicators on the approach path. Nothing critical, but I'd recommend adding 5 knots to our approach speed just to maintain margin." Ryan checked the data and agreed. "Good call. Let's add the speed. Better to be cautious with shear conditions." They landed without incident, the extra speed providing exactly the margin they needed when they encountered a brief wind shift on final approach. After shutdown, James logged the wind shear in the report, so the next crew would have the information. "Textbook flying," Ryan said. "You saw something worth noting and spoke up without hesitation. That's exactly how it should work." "That's how you've made it work," James corrected. "A year ago, I probably would have kept quiet about something that minor. Didn't want to seem overcautious or question the captain's judgment, but now I know that speaking up is part of doing the job right." That evening, Ryan called Maya from his hotel room in Seattle. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless. "Dad, perfect timing. I just got my grade on the career day presentation. You know, the one about you?" "And?" "A+. Mrs. Richardson said it was the best presentation in the class because it showed what real leadership looks like, not just the Hollywood version. She asked if you'd be willing to come speak to the class about aviation safety." Ryan smiled. "I'd be honored. Tell Mrs. Richardson I'll make time for that. Also, I got invited to join the Student Leadership Council because of something I said in the presentation about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. So basically, your hydraulic leak is advancing my middle school political career. Just thought you should know." "I'm very proud of you, Maya. For the presentation, for getting invited to Leadership Council, for being the kind of person who stands up for what's right. Your mom would be proud too." There was a brief pause, the kind that always came when they mentioned Maya's mother. "I know she would. And Dad? I think she'd be proud of you too, for everything you've done this year, for changing things, for being brave enough to make hard choices." "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me." After they hung up, Ryan stood at the window of his hotel room, looking out at the lights of Seattle spreading below. He thought about the journey from that tarmac in January to this moment in October. The investigation, the job change, the battles fought and won, the culture slowly shifting towards something better and safer. He thought about Lena Ward, wherever she was now, probably still bitter about how things had ended. He hoped she'd learned something from the experience, though he suspected she hadn't. Some people never did. He thought about all the co-pilots and flight attendants and mechanics who'd found the courage to speak up over these past months, who'd trusted the systems he'd built, who'd helped create the culture he'd envisioned. And he thought about the passengers who would never know how many small acts of courage kept them safe, the maintenance technician who took extra time on an inspection, the dispatcher who recommended a route change for weather, the co-pilot who spoke up about an unusual reading, the captain who listened and took action. That was the real victory, not the promotion or the FAA letter closure or the improved metrics. The real victory was knowing that somewhere tonight a crew would make a good decision because they trusted the system enough to speak up. Somewhere, a problem would be caught early because someone had the courage to report it. Somewhere, lives would be saved by people who would never know they'd made a difference. Ryan's phone buzzed with an email from Richard Pearson. The subject line read, "Board meeting results." He opened it to find a brief message. The board voted unanimously to approve your proposal for expanding the safety culture program to our freight operations and maintenance facilities. Budget approved, hiring authority granted, implementation timeline accepted. You've got everything you asked for. Now go build something that lasts. Richard Ryan typed back a simple reply. Thank you for the trust. I won't waste it. Then he closed his laptop, set his alarm for the early morning departure, and went to sleep knowing that tomorrow he'd do it all again. Make the flights, train the crews, build the systems, create the culture where safety truly came first. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of thing that made headlines or won awards. But it was work that mattered, work that saved lives, work that made the industry better for everyone who depended on it. And that, Ryan had learned, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.